Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining this afternoon. Hopefully you grabbed a drink during the break. For those of you that haven't seen me today, I'm Andrew Norman from ShipStation, and I'm pleased and proud to be presenting these sessions on the final day. This is in fact the final session of the final day, so we've saved the best till last. So just a reminder on some housekeeping items and some suggestions for the afternoon. Please do make use of the networking areas on the Totem platform, such as the coffee tables. Please do take time to talk to the partners and sponsors and their team for any questions that you have. Please also use the question function on the Totem stage during these sessions. I think Andrew's content is going to generate a lot of questions. So please do fire away. We will consolidate those questions at the end. So the session will run for 50 minutes, 50 minutes with 40 minutes, roughly 40 minutes of presentation, and then 10 minutes of Q&A. Obviously, if Andrew's slot runs early, then we'll have more time for Q&A, but the total session will last for 50 minutes. So with that, I'm delighted to introduce you to Andrew Robathan from True Commerce. We got a real stalwart for the last session, someone that's, Andrew's the director of e-commerce at True Commerce and has deep knowledge and experience when it comes to B2B commerce, and was one of the first people, I guess, in his domain in the UK, and spent more than 22 years advising a number of different companies on e-commerce strategy and solution platforms. So really delighted that you could join us today, Andrew, and I'll let you jump in if that's okay.
Okay, thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks for the introduction. As Andrew said, I'm Director of E-commerce at True Commerce. True Commerce is a multinational company specializing in all things to do with e-commerce. So, and as Andrew said, my kind of experience dates back 22 years. So we started out as kind of B2B specialists. So, and I think it's fair to say e-commerce has morphed massively, in those 22 years in terms of where we are today compared to what e-commerce looked like at the start of my career. But yeah, I've got the fortunate position of advising lots of businesses on their e-commerce strategies, and these businesses can range from very small startups who are purely online operators through to some quite large multi-billion-pound FTSE-related companies. And the one thing I think is clear that you probably kind of heard multiple times this week is that the subject area of e-commerce is wider than ever, especially as a result of the pandemic as well, as people have kind of opened up new routes to market and new sales channels. So today I wanted to share with you what I'm seeing and hearing on a regular basis from the businesses that I advise, and hopefully, some of that will ring true with your situations and things that you're thinking about in terms of the future and your strategy as well. So in particular, I want to look at the changes businesses have had to make in response to the pandemic, and whether those changes are actually here to stay. And if they are here to stay, then it's likely that the short-term fixes some businesses may have put in place will need reviewing in order to deliver a successful long-term post-pandemic strategy. So if we start by looking at pre-COVID, here's some kind of interesting stats which will act as a backdrop to this afternoon's session. So if we look at the before the pandemic started, so February 2020, so it's kind of like a month before things really started getting bad. Well, the Office of National Statistics at that point in time released a stat that around 20% of UK trade was occurring online. And if you pay particular attention to the second stat there, it's quite amazing, really. There's 29% increase in e-commerce in 11 years. So we'll come back to that number, but whilst it's a significant number, it's grown steadily but slowly over quite a considerable period of time. But the thing that was quite surprising was the last stat there, which is a Tamebay stat, as it happens, and that's the 40% of these e-commerce numbers actually are attributed to marketplace transactions as well. So clearly marketplaces a massive factor now in everyone's e-commerce strategy. March the 11th, 2020. So what's the significance of that date? Well, some of you, I'm sure, will know that that's the date the World Health Organization actually declared that we were entering a worldwide pandemic. So this was really the moment when a lot of us probably first started thinking seriously about what the effects of the pandemic would be, not just on our businesses, but on the world as a whole. To hear the word pandemic, and it's now common kind of part of our daily dictionary, that was quite scary at that point in time. And we really didn't have much time to prepare for it, because by March the 26th, so only about 2 weeks after the declaration of the pandemic, the UK entered lockdown, which of course, as we know, led to the closure of the high streets and all non-essential retail. So that those 2 weeks didn't really give us much time to prepare for what was going to be cast upon us. And if we look at the diagram here, you can see we've got our typical B2B operators on the left-hand side. So your manufacturers, your distributors, your wholesalers. So they will be, trading in amongst themselves. But equally, they'll have been trading with the high street retailers. And in turn, the consumers then will be purchasing their products through those retailers. So generally, not many of them were doing direct to consumer. They were observing the normal rules of engagement and avoiding cannibalizing their traditional routes to market. Suddenly, those routes were abruptly blocked off, and with the retailers closed, this had the potential to have quite catastrophic results on a number of businesses. And I work with businesses in retail as well as hospitality, and it's fair to say probably the hospitality sector out of our entire customer base, and those businesses I speak to have probably had the worst run of it, because those pubs and restaurants have pretty much remained closed and been worst affected. But in terms of those businesses that were selling through the retailers, they've never seen this situation before, and there was the stark reality that the sustainability of their business was dependent on a number of key trading partners. And everybody learned quite quickly that the route to market was not as robust or as secure as they probably thought it was, but nobody had to contend with anything like this before. So what did businesses do as a response to this COVID situation and not being able to get to the consumers? It was easy for some of them because they already had an online presence, and this was typically a website. So they instantly started seeing an increase in volumes and responded accordingly by beefing up their web presences. Some of these businesses were also already selling direct to consumers through the marketplace channels, but a lot were not. And they had to look for a very quick solution to open up some new sales channels to get more consumers buying their products again. And we helped a lot of businesses achieve that during those early days of the pandemic. But equally, we saw lots of businesses saying they just didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to manage that marketplace process. So the only option for them was to go to an outsourced provider where they could basically get somebody else to list the products and handle the orders for them. And as a result of these changes, it's fair to say that on average, most of our clients are now operating on 5 different sales channels. So that could be a combination of B2B and B2C e-commerce plus several marketplaces. So there'll be generic marketplaces, but also you've got your specialist marketplaces. Depending on what product you sell, you're likely to have a specialist one, which people will go to specifically to buy clothing or whatever it is that you sell. Indeed, some of our customers even have more channels than that. They'll be also trading through EDI, and they'll also have telesales. They might have traditional field sales operations as well. So, it's quite clear that businesses have become a lot more complex as a result of the diversification that they've had to go through in response to COVID. So again, looking back at some stats here, if we jump back to June 2020, so this is effectively several months into the pandemic. It's actually, we were at the point in time where we're getting to the end of the first lockdown in the UK. So the Office for National Statistics published some new numbers, which basically said that 33% of UK shopping was now occurring through e-commerce. So if we remember the initial stats prior to COVID, this is quite a remarkable increase. So there's a 70% increase in e-commerce volumes just within that sort of 4-month period. This trend continued throughout 2020, and it's quite remarkable if we think that e-commerce grew by 36% in 2020 compared to 2019, especially when you consider that it had only grown 29% over the previous 11 years. So it's quite a remarkable swing in terms of how people were purchasing. And the last number there, the 46%, this really gives us some insight into what was driving these big changes. So that 46% represents the percentage of consumers that bought for the very first time one or more products online. So what that's saying is it wasn't a case of existing e-commerce users spending more. It was really the fact that a lot of people that traditionally bought through the retail channels had suddenly switched because they had to, basically. So they were buying online for the very first time. So it's always good to kind of quote stats from other people, but it's also good to create some of your own sometimes. So what I've got here is some figures that we've pulled from our own involvement with our own customers. So I've put together a graph here, which starts in January 2020 and goes up to May 2020, which was kind of the peak of the first lockdown. So if we take this blue line, we can see that there's an extremely sharp increase in marketplace transactions between March and May there. So as the lockdown started, you can see that jumped up very, very swiftly. So what we saw at the end of May was marketplace transactions going through our networks of which were 220% higher than pre-lockdown levels. So, you know, just something that you could never forecast really, but telling in terms of the situation we were in and how people use the technology to deal with the problems. The orange line lower down in the graph, that's your traditional e-commerce transaction levels. So not marketplace, this would be your B2C, B2B transaction levels there. And you can see that ended up 130% higher than the opening levels. So although this growth is a lot smaller than what we saw with marketplaces, there is some kind of reasoning behind that. So the key factor at play here is the length of time it typically takes to implement a new e-commerce solution. So unlike marketplaces where you can start trading with a relatively low kind of lead time, if you're building an e-commerce strategy and implementing a solution, things do take a bit longer. So on our orange line here, that was basically a demonstration of an uplift in transactions with the existing customers that were already operational when COVID struck. So on the last side, we could see dramatic effects of the pandemic. Before we look any further ahead, let's look at what the businesses actually think of these new trading models and whether they think they're here to stay. So I'll just switch to some stats here that I've obtained from McKinsey & Company. They've done a very interesting survey which goes right through the pandemic. You can see here it starts in April 2020 and comes right up to February 2021. So on the left-hand side here, they were asking businesses how effective they thought these new sales channels were as they had pivoted their businesses. So you can see there in April, when we were probably only a month or so into the pandemic, only 50% of the respondents thought that the new sales channels were actually effective. If we roll on to February of this year, so you know we're probably 11 months in at that point, we can see that number's grown massively from 50% to 83%. So that's really businesses seeing the net effects of those new sales channels and the benefits it's delivered to their business. So, it's a singing endorsement really of the fact that they believe in these new sales channels. Now, if we then move to the right-hand side of this slide, which looks at sustainability, this really gives us some guidance as to what we think might happen in the future. So you can see here that 90% of businesses think that these new sales channels and the methods that we put into place as a response to the pandemic are actually going to persist for at least 12 months plus after the pandemic has ended. So that's really telling, because this is giving us a good insight into what's going to happen next, essentially. So if we come back to the graph of the stats that I've kind of pulled together from our customers and the transactions, I initially showed you this graph, but cutting off in May. So it was up to the end of the first lockdown. So if we look at what happened after May, when people started returning to the office after the first lockdown, we can see that the marketplace transactions dropped off quite significantly as we went into June and non-essential retail restarted. And as this was the first lockdown and relatively brief, I think we can deduce that people were very keen to revert to pre-lockdown habits. So, they were keen to get back out, get onto the high street and go back to their old ways of purchasing products. But even at the lowest point there, if we go to look at September and October, where we've got the biggest lull in those marketplace transactions on that blue line, those levels are still 50% up on the pre-lockdown levels. So clearly at that point, they've been successful in swaying a number of consumers into sticking with these new methods of online purchasing. If we look at the orange line, e-commerce levels, whilst they've not risen so dramatically pre-lockdown, you can see similarly they did not fall as dramatically post that first lockdown either, and they actually continued to be relatively steady with some slight rise as well. If we then come to October, this is when we entered the second lockdown. We see an instant uplift in the marketplace transactions, again very similar to what we saw at the time of the first lockdown. But interestingly, if we look at the orange line here, we can see that this has risen significantly more than it did the first time round, and this is really down to the fact that those people in the first lockdown were investing in getting their own e-commerce strategies together. So by the time the second lockdown came, they were actually ready for it, and they were able to switch to those models that they'd been building in the previous few months. So Christmas time, then we see peaks there exceeding the previous peak that we saw in lockdown, and then you got the usual New Year kind of lull. People have less money to spend in January and February, and things tail off slightly. And then if we look at the end of our graph there, we can see that we've ended with marketplace transactions still being 210% up on pre-lockdown. But quite startlingly, the e-commerce transactions we see now are 307% up on those initial levels. So whilst it's been a bit of a slow burn with people having projects in play, it's really given us a good insight into where that balance is likely to be post-pandemic in terms of the interplay between marketplace and e-commerce as probably the two key digital sales channels the companies are now operating on. So what does the post-pandemic exit strategy look like? Well, most businesses already had e-commerce and were managing this in-house. So if we look at the top of this diagram here, the vendor, the business was actually managing the e-commerce, and it was integrated with their internal systems. And that was something, that was in place, tried and tested, and a route to market. But when it came to the pandemic, a lot of them didn't have that resource, didn't have the bandwidth to actually go and implement new systems. So they went down the outsourcing route, and a lot of people looked up third-party agencies who could take care of the entire process. So you'll see from this diagram, they outsource that agency route into the marketplaces. Very minimal kind of integration, if you like, between the business and the third party. So in short, I suppose this really did save the day for a lot of businesses, because they were in a dire situation with their route to market being cut off, and needs must in terms of getting those revenues back through the door again. So whilst this worked, if the new channels are actually here to stay, which is what the stats are actually saying to us, the approach is right in terms of that marketplace and e-commerce mix. But what we are seeing is that whilst revenues are up, and some businesses have indeed made bigger revenues during the pandemic than they've ever made before, what people are now looking at is the profitability of some of those channels. So where they've rushed to put kind of knee-jerk solutions in place to bring in the revenue, when they analyze it, actually they find they're eroding their profitability on some of those channels as well. So when I speak to businesses, you generally keep hearing the same themes over and over again, and I think every business is seeing the same challenges in terms of current trading and how they've decided to go to market. So where they've rushed into things, this generally means that the gross profits are lower than what they would have hoped. They're now starting to look at how they can improve those things, as these are not temporary sales channels now, but ones that they're going to kind of persist with possibly long into the future. So add to the fact that many of these businesses have said that their product data is not great, and that this has resulted in increases in the number of returns they've had to process. And then many will also state that coupled with this, there's a higher than ever importance for maintaining and allocating accurate stock levels, because they're operating across as many as 5 or more sales channels. Clearly, there's one pool of available free stock, and quite often they find themselves overselling where they haven't got enough stock available to fulfill one of those channels, because one of the other channels has actually been busy and sold that stock. And because the systems are not joined up, they find in disparity in the information that they present into the customers, inaccuracies, which ultimately will lead to customer dissatisfaction, because either the order gets cancelled or the lead time on it will increase significantly. And again, coming back to product information, if the product data isn't accurate, then you do have customers then who bought a product in good faith, and then they want to return it because it doesn't quite live up to the description that they read online. So all of these factors are kind of burning issues for most of the businesses that we speak to. If you put all of this together, you probably have to ask the question, are any businesses actually succeeding in growing both the revenues and the profit in the current climate? So turning back to another stat again here, this one is one that was prepared by Deloitte. So they did an interesting survey where they looked at businesses from 2 aspects. One was, how much they've grown their net profit and how much they've grown their net revenue. And the other aspect was looking at the level of digitization of those businesses. So the digitization is all about, how joined up those businesses are and how automated the processes are. So what this graph really demonstrates is the big disparity between the growth in revenue and profit for the businesses where some of their processes are manual, or maybe they've just outsourced things. So they see a far smaller level of growth of around 15%, whereas those businesses with a higher maturity level of their systems are actually seeing 3 times that level in both net revenue growth and net profit growth. So those are quite remarkable numbers, and it really opens our eyes to the benefits that can be gained through actually looking at the internal systems and processes and how we might be able to do things better. So if we look at the long-term digital strategy, that's really about reviewing systems and processes and looking at how we can join the dots really to have a fully integrated solution which allows businesses to gain control and ownership of their customer relationships again. And again, during the pandemic, you know, a lot of businesses will say that they lost touch with some of those customers, either through, you know, the use of third parties, so they were at arm's length, or they just didn't have time to kind of do the usual, provide the usual level of customer service and monitoring of those transactions. But with all other things being equal, knowing and satisfying your customers never actually been more important. So if we look at this diagram here and along the top, these are the typical kind of routes to market, the sales channels the companies operate in. So along at the top, we have e-commerce storefronts. That could be B2B, B2C. Marketplaces, again, generally it's not just one marketplace, but multiple marketplaces that businesses transacting through. EDI, so there might be some EDI relationships that are in place with customers where there's automated reordering from the customer's systems. And if you're selling consumer products to retail stores, you may even have some even more sophisticated solutions in place around automatic replenishment. So you'll see there we mentioned collaborative replenishment, or VMI. VMI, for those that don't know, is vendor managed inventory. So it's basically where you have an insight into your customer's stock level, and rather than waiting for the customer to reorder, you know how much they typically sell, and you're automatically shipping stock out to them to make sure that they've always got your product and they never run low on your stock. So with all of that in play, the big question is, how can we make all of this actually work seamlessly, consistently and accurately, while still allowing us scope to scale the business on demand to, you know, cater for the unknowns that might come along in the future. And really that all comes down to the digital systems that we put in place behind the scenes. So the customer doesn't see any of this, but really it's the thing that makes your operation slick and ultimately delivers that customer satisfaction by ensuring everything is accurate and the customer gets what they've ordered on time. So again, if we look at from left to right along the bottom line of this diagram, so we have catalog management. Some of you will know this as PIM, or product information management. And those are solutions that allow you to improve your data quality and give you a single source of data and the ability to output that data across all of your sales channels. So rather than maintaining data in multiple places or providing separate data feeds for your different sales channels, it's just done once, and you can ensure that the quality of that, there's processes in place and quality control to make sure it's accurate before it goes out to your customers. The next box along then is inventory management. So I mentioned there overselling. It is a common theme where you know, you've with all good intention, you've published your products on a marketplace, you've sold more than you thought, you haven't delisted those products, and you've then got to let down some customers because you can't fulfill it, or indeed your lead time isn't quite what you've quoted on there. So inventory management is your connection with your available stock and the ability to allocate that stock to all your different sales channels to make sure that it's always fulfillable. And that links in neatly to order management. So again, when you've got all of these channels on the go, it's very difficult to keep a track of what you're selling through each of those channels. So an order management portal actually brings all of those channels together. So the sales across all of your products, all of your customers are all brought together into one place. And it's that consolidated view of your orders then that updates the inventory management and gives you that fingertip kind of access to statistics and your business intelligence, so you can see exactly what's going on, and you can ensure that your stock is balanced and being maximized across all of those sales channels. Digital commerce, having your e-commerce in-house fully integrated and dovetailed into those three systems. That ensures, again, that consistency and real-time view that you can present to your customer. Same with your trading platform. By bringing your marketplace solution in-house, that ensures that you've got full control and visibility over that. And again, the listings, the order processing, there's no lag, everything is done in real time. And then one of the last pieces of the jigsaw is order fulfillment. So again, this is an area a lot of businesses will quite often outsource. What we're talking about here is the pick, pack, dispatch, consignment, booking process. So a lot of businesses will have internal systems or ERP systems that might not be geared up to handle some of these aspects. So outsourcing to a third-party logistics company is quite often a popular route, but there are systems available out there that can effectively manage all of that. So from an order management system, they will actually take care of all of the labeling, the dispatch, and the booking consignments. And again, that gives you full control over that process from the point of ordering through to dispatching the product out through your couriers. So again, it allows you to own that transaction from start to finish and ensure that quality of service that eventually filters back through to your customer and the experience that they have dealing with your business. So looking at this, you're probably thinking, well, actually, I've ticked a few boxes there, but how does this relate to us in terms of our digital maturity? So if we're looking at all of these different systems and the different business models in play, how can we measure where we are on this path to digital maturity, and how do we get to those kind of maximum levels of profit and revenue growth? So in simple terms, the measure of your business's digitization actually is now a correlation, high correlation with your revenue and growth. So something I've been heavily involved with recently is helping businesses measure their current level of digitization and to work out how they can maximize this and develop a strategy to deliver it. So the screenshot you can see here is a dashboard that I like to use to demonstrate back to businesses where they are currently on that path to digitization. So, and this will give them a good view into where the ceilings are on those growth and revenue potentials as a result of failings within some of the processes where they haven't yet put systems in place to deal with them. So digitization covers not just the sales channels, but also the after sales processes as well. So you'll all be aware of, the importance that once you've completed that sale, the whole thing with omni-channel, if the customer's bought that product online, they're going to want to do everything else online too. So if there's a return that needs to be handled, or there's a billing inquiry, they would expect to do that electronically as well. So again, if you've got a sales channel that's accounting for a large percentage of your revenue, but the after sales aspects of dealing with that sales channel are manual, then your efficiency levels are going to be very, very low, and it's going to bring down your digitization level, your overall digitization level. So when you look at the dashboard like this, it gives you a good idea of what your levels currently are and what your levels could be with the right systems in place. And the strategy that comes out of a review like this not only informs your business what those system and process changes are, but also your sales and marketing strategy, because sometimes you just have to funnel your customers into the channels that are most efficient. For instance, you can automate orders that you might receive via email, but there's not a great deal you can do with telephone orders where you've got to have somebody answering the phone and key in the details into your telesales system. So, by incentivizing that segment of your customers to use a digital channel, this can actually yield a noticeable performance improvement and massively increase your digitization levels, because you're actively migrating customers onto the channels that are easiest for you to work with, rather than persisting with those channels that are effectively very inefficient and legacy channels. So the key takeaway really from this here is that you should really start reviewing, if you haven't already done so, should start immediately reviewing your digitization maturity, so that you can refine the existing digital strategy that you have in place, or maybe if you haven't yet formed that digital strategy, this would actually allow you to define that strategy for the first time. So brings us to the last slide here, which is the summary really, and what we've learned from some of the stats and things that we've looked at here, and from the customers that I speak to on a regular basis. And what they're all saying is business has never been more complicated than it is now. The increase in the number of sales channels that they have to manage has never been larger. And whilst it may never have been easier to get in front of the customer in terms of there's very minimal barrier to entry these days in terms of what you have to invest to get in front of the customer, it doesn't come without its complications. And that's a consistent message that I'm hearing from customers who've suddenly pivoted those businesses and haven't got the back-end processes in place to really deliver it. Outsourcing can be a very quick fix, but it is unlikely to give you the long-term growth, profitability and stability that your business model demands. So maintaining the new sales channels that you have in place. The one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that we need to prepare for the unexpected. So it's not a case of turning these channels off again once things seem to go back to normal. It's a case of maintaining these so that you can continue to thrive when some or all of your traditional routes to market get cut off, and who knows what the future's got to hold for us. So by having this security and independence over the sales channels, which you might not have had previously, puts us in a much stronger place going forward. The other key thing as well is having your systems fully integrated, so you haven't got those gaps between them where the customer dissatisfaction can creep in. So owning those processes will ensure you get quality out of those processes, and it allows you to add value and differentiate from the other customers that might be competing with you through their own e-commerce or marketplace solutions. Changing the way your business measures itself. This is really a big change in the way we're encouraging businesses to think. So rather than measuring the outcomes, which is really the traditional way of looking at your business, where you sit down and look at what's our revenue grown by, what's our profitability grown by. These are really outcomes and factors of your digital strategy. So maybe it's time for you to start looking at your business differently and start by measuring your digitization levels, because if these really are a gauge for profit and revenue growth, then let's start at the front end and work backwards instead. And just realize that the traditional metrics of any modern business are now intrinsically linked to these new measures of digital readiness. So that brings me to the end of the slides. So many thanks for your time this afternoon. I hope some of the information that I shared with you there from some of the businesses that I work with relates to yours, and it's been informative, and some of that strikes a chord. And hopefully some of this will help you on your next stage of your strategy. So I know it's Friday and the weekend is fast approaching, and for this week has been a key one because lots of the pubs and restaurants have been open. So I'm sure you're planning on a post-lockdown drink or meal, but if you have any questions, please fire away. I'll be happy to answer them now, or alternatively, if you think of anything after this session, feel free to email me directly as well. So Andrew, back over to you.
Great stuff. There's some fantastic things in there. I think some of those slides you had towards the end are almost like a template or a manual. I think there's some really, really good stuff in there. Something that kind of struck me as you were going through that, and you touched on it at the end actually, is kind of, when I've worked with merchants before, sometimes that kind of whole reporting capability, is not as mature as people are sort of driving partially sighted, if that makes sense. So I think you touched on it with your, with your metrics, but what would be the kind of things that you would recommend people sort of first start getting their arms around in terms of the data they should be measuring in their business?
So yeah, it's a good question. And what we do, we start by looking at the sales channels, and every business has got a different number of sales channels and different routes to market. So we look at the relevance and the percentage of volumes going through each of those sales channels in the first instance. Then we dig a bit deeper then, and we look at the what happens, once you've acquired that sale digitally. What's the process between that sale being acquired and getting processed, and are there manual steps in there? And then all of those things, we can put a number on them. So we've created our own dashboards which allow us to come up with measurements and showing the effectiveness of those sales channels. And then each of the after sales processes then that follow from those sales, again, we measure those as well. And then from those outputs, businesses get a really good view of, oh right, we can get 30% more efficiency on these two channels, and we can get 40% more efficiency on the after sales. And then the conversation is, right, how do we do that then, and what are the systems that we put in place to do it? So really, it's a case of and it's always a different set of results for every business that we review as well. But the one common denominator is every business, when they see those stats, they find it very interesting, because it's a very simplified view of what's really going on and what those drivers are. And like I said, quite often, people in finance are just looking at the outcomes rather than what happens in terms of generating those outcomes and how they can make that process more efficient. So it's efficiency, and the more digital that process is, the more efficient that process is.
Yeah, good. That makes sense. We talked a lot about kind of process and technology, I think, in the sessions today. What's your view on, the importance of people? It kind of feels to me like there is generally a bit of a skills shortage, in e-com. There's not a whole sort of dearth of talent. And how should people kind of maybe try and tackle that? And also, how should organizations almost be set up? I know it's like a huge question, but are there sort of things that you see in terms of how people are set up organizationally? Because e-com used to be very much buried in the marketing scene back in the day, for example. So what would be your perspective on the people side of things?
Yeah, it's funny because e-commerce is one of those things, and like I said, I've been doing it long enough to have seen various cycles now. And if we go back 20 plus years, e-commerce was seen as a technology, and it was very much the remit of the IT department in terms of, an e-commerce solution, right? Let's get IT to look at that, and they'll manage it. So our first customers back then were very much in that camp. Then we had a cycle then, sort of 10 years ago, where it went totally the other way, and e-commerce was thrown over to the marketing department. And whilst marketing had a big say in the customer interface and how things were presented to the customer and the user journey, they were left also holding the baby when it came to the complexities and the things that would have been better dealt with by IT. So I think where we're at now, we see a much more kind of joined up strategy with businesses, where they realize it's a combination. It's you have a steering group that consists of marketing, consists of sales, IT, and customer service, and all of that is generally spearheaded by a digital or e-commerce manager or director. And again, that shows the level of maturity of the business as well. When you see that they've got a digital director or an e-commerce director, that business is investing a lot of time and effort into their strategies as well. Whereas the businesses where they haven't got a named contact, they're very early on in that kind of evolution process.
You got some big questions here. Some of them are crystal ball questions, so you're gonna have to get ready for some of these. What practices or lessons learned in the pandemic do you think will stay around as we emerge to normal trading, and which we will not keep?
So I think the big lesson for businesses, and it's always good, isn't it, hindsight, and we don't know what we don't know, as people say, and I think we all sit around in business and have business continuity plans, and we plan for the obvious, and nobody had pandemic in their toolkit of in terms of what the response was going to be. So the one thing I think that lots of businesses have learned is they were very exposed and reliant on trading partners. And when those trading partners were unable to operate because of legal constraints put on them, it actually filtered back through that supply chain and meant they couldn't trade. So, I think a lot of businesses learned a lot of very hard lessons in terms of their security of sales channels, basically, where they didn't actually own them, and never banked on the situations rising that we saw. So businesses have built direct-to-consumer models. They've gone around the convention that we've seen in terms of observing normal supply chain rules and market rules, and having the direct-to-consumer channel for many. We've got manufacturers who have direct-to-consumer. You would never have thought that in a million years, but they've had to do it through compulsion, and that's the only way they've survived. And those channels are going to stay. They're not going to go away now, because it's been the thing that saved those businesses during the situations that we've seen. So I don't think any business is going to go back to convention. And I think the new world we are seeing, we're still seeing businesses make decisions at lightning breakneck speed. I have weekly calls with big businesses where you'd never, previously a decision would take probably the best part of a year, and these big decisions are being made in probably 2 months now, because strategies are changing at rates we could never have foreseen.
The two questions I think are sort of related, really about agility and resilience. So retailers need to be as agile as possible going forward. What easy things can they do to achieve that? And then the second, which I think is a different but related, how can retailers become more resilient to change as we move forward? I think it kind of touches on what you said, right? It's innovation and dynamism and ability to pivot quickly. So what would be your kind of, I guess, key learnings or recommendations around that?
It's just having those systems in place to support multi-channel, really. And I think businesses, what we saw is they had a very rigid business model, and they had ERP systems set up to work in a very prescribed way. And this was ultimately their enemy then, because whilst they had the ideas in terms of realizing what they needed to do as a business to survive, their internal systems, they were hamstrung by their internal systems. So having those flexible systems in place now will just mean that businesses will be able to spin up new channels, new routes to market, because they'll have product data under control, they'll have the inventory management under control, they'll have the order management under control, and it doesn't matter how many channels you add to that. They truly are a multi-channel business going forward. Whether it's 2 channels or 20 channels, it makes little difference to them. They've got a scalable model, and they didn't have that previously. They had one model, especially B2B. They were used to shifting volumes of product on pallets, on trucks, and all of a sudden they were shipping small quantities via couriers direct to consumer. So, these systems weren't geared up. They had to bolt on, they had to buy in those modules to supplement what the ERP systems did. So yeah, flexibility and scalability are really the key to any business going forward.
Got a question on sustainability, which I think is a really good kind of relevant topic, especially in Europe. Consumers seem to want more sustainable services. How can retailers achieve quick wins when it comes to sustainability? For example, packaging, category choice. I think that's a much bigger question to unpack, but sustainability feels like it is a big thing, right? Especially, as I say, maybe less so in the US, but certainly in Europe, it's very front of mind. So what would be your maybe suggestions, people to think about, or even initial strategies around that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I think again we see from our customers, there are shortages with cardboard. The price of cardboard has gone up as a result of the increased volumes that are being shipped around the world. There's supply chain problems, in terms of the consumer goods and the demand that's been put on it. But it's moved the carbon problem and the sustainability problem away. So we're not jumping in our cars, but equally all of these background processes are kind of going on, and consuming resources instead. So it's just moved the problem really. So I'm not sure it's what the kind of end goal is, and what, obviously the packaging that we're seeing coming through the doors and landing on our doorsteps is clearly, personally I'm seeing much more sustainable packaging in terms of cardboard and paper, and reduction in plastics and things. But like I said, all of that cardboard and paper is coming from trees as well, and there's a shortage of that at the moment. So I don't really know the answer to that one. I don't think it's one I can help solve with technology. I think it's definitely a much bigger one.
Listen, we're out of time. We've got more questions, so I know that people can contact you directly or reach out to any of your team if they've got more questions. Just huge thanks from us. Some really, really great insights and perspective on things that have happened over the last 12 months and beyond that. So thanks for joining us today, Andrew. Thanks for your
thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Chris in a second. Just want to say thanks on behalf from me. Sorry, it's been my pleasure hosting the day today. Been some fantastic content. Hopefully, some really good takeaways for all of us, with some suggestions, possibly reinforcing things, making us feel good about the things we are doing, and also some opportunities to do some things differently. So I'm going to say this very quickly because I know Chris is going to kick me otherwise. Please don't forget to download contents of your delegate bag, PDFs and contact data before leaving the platform. I know, Chris, I think the platform is staying open for networking later on today. So that's it from me. As I say, it's been a pleasure hosting you today. Hopefully it's been worthwhile, and I will hand you back to the man with the most fantastic shirt.
Thank you, Andrew. So what a week it's been. Around 1,200 people have registered for this event, 54 speakers, 35 sessions, 5 co-hosts and 1 title sponsor, eBay. Our thanks have got to go to all of our presenting partners and our co-hosts from Hurricane, ECOMMERCE, GFS and ShipStation, and our title sponsor, eBay. This has been a week where we started the learning with going back to the basics and looking at the nuts and bolts of our business. Then on Tuesday, we looked at how to get explosive growth. We looked at brand strategies on Wednesday and cross-border Thursday. And finally today, we focused on expanding your marketplace business for the future. And I think it's kind of apt that we've ended kind of where we started with going back to the basics and exiting the pandemic strategy. So there's been a wealth of information from our presenting partners. And in the near future, we'll be inviting you back to the Tamebay Live website, where you'll be able to rewatch sessions that are key to you and watch any of the sessions that you miss. So if you're about to ask how you can rewatch, just give us a couple of days and we'll get that lined up for you. Now, this has been Tamebay's first major event. It's only been possible thanks to the amazing internet retailing and RetailX team, of which we became a part 5 years ago. And behind the scenes, there's been dozens of people that have worked tirelessly to put Tamebay Live together. So a special thanks to Mark for putting the event together, and especially to Fiona, who's run the Tamebay Live operations absolutely flawlessly. And there's been a ton more of the team welcoming speakers, moderating questions, making sure everything's running smoothly. People like Lauren and Addison, Anthony, James, Chris, Sophie, Andy, Quill, Mel and Liz, and actually the totem team that have been running. Gail and Nathan have been our production managers for the week and controlled the video feeds to your screens. Thank you so much for your input, everyone. So what's next for Tamebay? Well, from Monday morning, Lauren and I will be back behind our desks writing editorial as normal. So please keep the tips on news coming into both of us. The future Tamebay is where it always has been, writing about the platforms that you sell on, the marketplaces, the social media, and the newer ones like messaging apps. And actually, I hope you caught the eDesk and Google session today, the new shopping opportunities through search engine capabilities. And maybe when more normal times are back, we'd love to welcome you all in person, along with our presenting partners, to an event where we can maybe have a beer and lunch at. So watch out for some news, maybe as soon as 2022. We'll let you know. So I hope you've enjoyed the week. Once again, thank you for showing up to Listen, Learn and Network. A huge thanks to our presenting partners for their vast knowledge. our co-hosts who have helped run the week, and finally to the amazing speakers from our title sponsor, eBay. So Tamebay Live is closing down in about an hour's time, but we'll see you back on tamebay.com first thing Monday morning. So have a great weekend, and thank you to everyone.